December 24, 2002 begins as a quiet morning in Modesto, California. In a modest suburban neighborhood, a pregnant woman named Lacey Peterson disappears from her home. She is 8 months pregnant with her first child. Her husband, Scott Peterson, tells police she planned to walk their dog that morning while he went fishing. When he returns home, he says the house is empty. The dog is outside with a leash still attached. Peterson contacts family members and neighbors. Soon after, he reports his wife missing. Police arrive at the home and begin a standard missing person investigation. The early hours focus on routine questions. Detectives document the timeline. They search the house for signs of disturbance. There is no forced entry. Nothing appears stolen. Friends and family gather quickly. Flyers are printed. Volunteers begin searching nearby parks and streets. The case spreads through local television stations. The disappearance of a pregnant woman on Christmas Eve draws immediate attention. Within days, the story reaches national news. Peterson speaks to reporters outside his home. He appears calm. He asks for help finding his wife. He thanks volunteers for their support. At this stage, investigators treat him as a concerned spouse. That is common in missing person cases. Police first collect information. They look for evidence before forming conclusions. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing, because what happens next reveals how this system truly works. As investigators review the timeline, small details begin to stand out. Peterson says he spent the morning fishing at the Barkley Marina, nearly 90 miles away. He tells detectives he decided to go fishing at the last minute. Receipts confirm he purchased a fishing license that day. He also shows investigators the boat he recently bought. Detectives document these facts carefully. At first, nothing directly links Peterson to a crime. But the timeline raises questions. Lacey Peterson's family says she planned to spend Christmas Eve preparing for dinner with relatives. They say she did not mention any plans to walk the dog that morning. Police expand the search area. Divers scan nearby waterways. Officers interview neighbors who might have seen something unusual. One neighbor reports finding the Petersons' dog wandering alone in the street earlier that morning. The leash is still attached. Another neighbor returns the dog to the backyard. Investigators examine the house again. There are no signs of struggle. Lacey's purse and personal belongings remain inside. Her car is still in the driveway. Detectives begin building a detailed record of the couple's life. Financial records, phone logs, and work schedules become part of the investigation. At this stage, Scott Peterson remains publicly cooperative. He participates in interviews. He joins search efforts. But investigators notice small inconsistencies in his statements. The exact time he leaves the house changes slightly between interviews. His explanation of the fishing trip remains brief. Meanwhile, the case grows larger. National media crews arrive in Modesto. Reporters follow every development. Volunteers continue searching nearby parks and farmland. Lacey Peterson's family organizes prayer vigils. The community watches closely. Police continue gathering facts. Detectives work quietly. They review phone records and speak with co-workers. They examine Peterson's recent activities. What they find begins to shift the direction of the investigation. Before the disappearance, Peterson begins a relationship with a woman named Amber Fry. She later tells investigators she believed Peterson was unmarried. According to phone records, Peterson speaks with her frequently in the weeks before Lacey disappears. When detectives confirm this relationship, the investigation changes. Affairs do not prove murder. But they can reveal motive. Investigators now examine Peterson's behavior more closely. At the same time, search teams continue looking for Lacey Peterson. Days turn into weeks. No confirmed sightings appear. The missing person case slowly becomes a suspected homicide investigation. The man who reported the crime is no longer viewed only as a witness. He becomes the center of the investigation. Investigators continue examining the timeline of Scott Peterson. His relationship with Amber Fry becomes a central focus. Fry cooperates with police once she learns Peterson is married and his wife is missing. Investigators ask her to allow recorded phone conversations. These recordings later become important evidence. During these calls, Peterson speaks casually about his daily activities while search teams continue looking for his missing wife. In several conversations, he tells Fry he is traveling or spending time in public places. At the same time, media coverage intensifies. The disappearance of Lacey Peterson spreads across national television. Investigators review Peterson's financial records and phone logs. They reconstruct the hours surrounding the morning of December 24. Peterson states he left home late in the morning to go fishing at the marina in the San Francisco Bay Area. Detectives verify that he launched his small boat from the Barclay Marina that day. The location attracts attention because it is far from Modesto. The distance raises questions about why he chose that location for a short trip. Detectives examine surveillance cameras, receipts, and witness statements connected to the marina. They confirm Peterson's presence there that afternoon. Meanwhile, Fry continues cooperating with investigators. She records multiple calls with Peterson under police supervision. During these calls, Peterson sometimes speaks while standing near search locations or public memorial gatherings. Detectives document each conversation carefully. As weeks pass, police conduct multiple searches of waterways connected to the bay. Divers examine areas around the marina where Peterson says he was fishing. Search teams also examine rural land around Modesto. These searches continue through January and February. Public attention remains intense. National news outlets follow every development. Peterson continues appearing in public at several memorial events. His presence draws attention from cameras and reporters. Behind the scenes, detectives continue building their case. They compare Peterson's statements from early interviews with later ones. Small differences appear in descriptions of his schedule and activities. Investigators catalog each discrepancy. At the same time, Laci Peterson's family organizes continued searches and public appeals. Volunteers distribute flyers and hold candlelight vigils. The investigation becomes one of the most closely watched missing person cases in the United States. In April 2003, investigators make a discovery that changes the direction of the case. The remains of an infant are found along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay near Richmond, California. The discovery is reported to police immediately. The following day, additional remains are found nearby. Authorities later identify them as those of Laci Peterson. The discovery occurs close to the same waters where Scott Peterson reported fishing months earlier. Forensic examination confirms the identities through DNA testing. Investigators now treat the case as a confirmed double homicide involving Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. Soon after the discovery, police increase surveillance of Scott Peterson. Detectives monitor his movements closely. They observe him traveling through Southern California. On April 18, 2003, officers arrest him in the city of La Jolla, California. At the time of his arrest, investigators report that Peterson carries several personal items in his vehicle, including cash, camping supplies, and identification belonging to his brother. Authorities transport him back to Modesto to face charges. Prosecutors formally charge Scott Peterson with 2 counts of murder. The case now moves from investigation into the court system. Prosecutors prepare evidence for trial while Peterson remains in custody inside the California prison system. The criminal case against Scott Peterson moves into the court system in 2003. Prosecutors in California charge him with 2 counts of murder for the deaths of Laci Peterson and their unborn son, Connor. Because of the intense media coverage surrounding the case, the court later decides to move the trial away from Modesto, California to ensure a fair jury. The trial eventually begins in 2004 in Redwood City, California. Jury selection takes months. Attorneys question hundreds of potential jurors about their knowledge of the case and their ability to remain impartial. The court imposes strict rules to limit outside influence from news coverage. During the trial, prosecutors rely heavily on circumstantial evidence. They argue that Peterson's behavior before and after the disappearance reveals motive and intent. Evidence presented in court includes phone records, financial documents, witness testimony, and the recorded conversations between Peterson and Amber Fry. Fry testifies in court about her relationship with Peterson. She explains that he told her he was single when they met. She later learns he is married only after Laci Peterson is reported missing. Under the direction of investigators, she records several phone calls with him during the early weeks of the investigation. Prosecutors present these recordings to the jury. In some of the calls, Peterson speaks calmly while search teams and family members continue looking for his missing wife. The recordings are introduced to illustrate his actions and statements during the investigation. Investigators also testify about Peterson's trip to the marina on December 24. They explain how they reconstructed his timeline using receipts, marina records, and witness statements. The prosecution argues that the location of the recovered remains corresponds with the waters where Peterson says he was fishing. The defense challenges this interpretation. Defense attorneys argue that the prosecution cannot prove exactly when or where the deaths occurred. They also questioned the reliability of certain forensic conclusions and witness accounts. The defense maintains that the evidence does not directly link Peterson to the killings. Throughout the proceedings, the court maintains strict rules governing the presentation of evidence. The judge reminds jurors repeatedly that they must rely only on testimony and exhibits presented during the trial. Media reports and outside commentary are excluded from consideration. The trial lasts several months. Jurors hear testimony from investigators, forensic specialists, and acquaintances of the Peterson family. Each witness contributes another piece to the timeline surrounding Laci Peterson's disappearance. The case also draws national attention to how circumstantial evidence is used in criminal trials. Legal experts discuss the prosecution's strategy and the standards required to reach a conviction. Meanwhile, the Peterson family and Laci Peterson's relatives attend many of the court sessions. By late 2004, both sides finish presenting their arguments. Prosecutors summarize their case by emphasizing Peterson's timeline, his relationship with Amber Frey, and the location where the bodies were discovered. Defense attorneys argue that the prosecution's theory relies on interpretation rather than direct proof. After closing arguments, the jury begins deliberations. Their task is to determine whether the evidence presented during the trial proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. After closing arguments, the jury begins deliberations in November 2004. The trial has lasted several months. Jurors have listened to testimony from investigators, forensic specialists, family members, and witnesses connected to the investigation. Their responsibility is to examine the evidence presented in court and determine whether the prosecution has proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The case centers on the disappearance and death of Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. Prosecutors argue that the actions and statements of Scott Peterson reveal planning and intent. The defense maintains that the evidence is circumstantial and does not establish exactly how the deaths occurred. Jurors review the timeline presented during the trial. They examine Peterson's trip to the marina on December 24, 2002. They review testimony about the discovery of remains along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay months later. They also consider the recorded phone calls between Peterson and Amber Frey, which were introduced during the prosecution's case. The jury deliberates for several days. They ask the court to review certain pieces of testimony and evidence again. The process follows the standard procedure used in American criminal trials. Jurors discuss the evidence privately until they reach a unanimous decision. On November 12, 2004, the jury returns to the courtroom in Redwood City, California. The court clerk reads the verdict. The jury finds Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder in the death of their unborn child. Following the verdict, the trial moves into the penalty phase. During this stage, jurors must decide the appropriate sentence under California law. Prosecutors present evidence related to the impact of the crime on Laci Peterson's family. Defense attorneys present mitigating factors about Peterson's background. After further deliberations, the jury recommends the death penalty. In March 2005, the judge formally sentences Scott Peterson to death and orders that he be transferred into the California state prison system. Peterson is initially sent to death row at San Quentin State Prison. The prison, located north of San Francisco, houses inmates sentenced to death under California law. Prisoners on death row live under strict security conditions while their appeals move through the court system. Years later, the legal process continues. Appeals are a standard part of capital cases in the United States. Courts review whether the original trial followed constitutional standards. These reviews examine jury selection procedures, legal instructions, and other elements of the trial record. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturns Peterson's death sentence because of issues related to jury selection during the penalty phase. However, the court upholds his conviction for the murders. The case returns to a lower court to reconsider the sentence. In 2021, a judge resentences Peterson to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is later transferred to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. There he begins serving his life sentence within the California prison system. Inside the prison, daily life follows a strict routine. Inmates remain under constant supervision. Movement between housing units, recreation yards, and work areas is controlled by correctional officers. Prisoners serving life sentences spend decades within this structure, often separated from the outside world. For the Peterson case, the legal outcome concludes years of investigation, court proceedings, and appeals. The disappearance reported on a quiet December morning ultimately leads to one of the most widely followed criminal trials in the United States. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.